Hello. Welcome to this operational case study Q&A for the August 2019 exam. Welcome to this operational case study Q&A for the August 2019. Just sorting out some sound issues. Don't need that feedback coming. Okay, so for those of you watching, just to say it again, welcome to the live Q&A. No questions currently in the box at the moment, which is fine. I've got plenty to talk about without needing a prompt. But if you do have any questions, then please do put them in the box and I'll get through as many as I can in this sitting. We tried one of these before, about 3 months ago for the previous operational case study, and that went quite well. So hopefully we'll be able to get something good here too. So I'll start off by talking a bit about the company. So the exam in August, we've been given the pre-scene that came out a few weeks ago now, didn't it? And the company we have is AKL Sparkle, who are a designer and manufacturer of silver bead bracelets. And they operate in Newland, which is in Asia. And Newland itself is a very prominent well known around the world for their jewelry. And so we have a company who operate in a country which has a reputation for its jewelry, highly competitive market, 360 odd competitors within that kind of jewelry sort of segment. A couple of big competitors to be watching out for. So AKL Sparkle, they work within the affordable fashion jewelry segment. This is all stuff in the pre-scene, so by now you probably had a look at the pre-scene yourself and are fairly familiar with it. Now, I won't talk too much about the particular company unless we get questions on it. What most students tend to find most helpful is a bit of advice or guidance on how to approach studying for this particular exam. So maybe that's what I'll talk about for a little bit to start with. But like I say, do ask your questions. If anything at all comes up on this particular pre-scene, on a general approach to case studies, what kind of things you need to study, what topics are likely to come up in the exam, whatever it may be. Apologies for the quality of the picture. Seems to be okay for the most part, but if you're having any issues or anything like that, do let us know. This video will be available to watch as well once the live Q&A is over. Okay, so maybe talk a bit about your approach in the case study. So if this is your first case study, if you're sitting it for the first time, you're perhaps wondering what you need to do to prepare, what you're studying, what your sort of revision should look like over the next 6 weeks or so in the run up to the exam. So the first place you want to start is with a very thorough reading of the pre-scene itself. That should always be where you start, because obviously the better you know the company, the better your answers will be in the exam, because the way this exam works is you are in this kind of fictional scenario where you work for AKL Sparkle, and that means that you kind of have to suspend your disbelief and you give answers as if you were really giving answers to your boss or whatever it might be. So the better you know the company, the better the answers you can give on whatever topics are asked of you in the actual exam itself. So that would definitely be the first place to start, is get to know the pre-scene. I really mean read it, take notes, maybe apply some business models. A great product for something, if you're interested, that we do at Astranti is a pre-scene analysis videos. That is essentially a very in-depth analysis of the pre-scene, and from that we get a very good understanding of what the likely issues are going to be in the exam in August. Once you've done that, once you feel very, very comfortable with the pre-scene and the company, then you want to go and start revising topics, because the exam will be made up. So this is what the OCS exam looks like. You'll have 4 questions, and each of those 4 questions has 2 sub-requirements. So in total, you have 8 sub-requirements, and you'll have 4 of those sub-requirements will be on P1 topics, 2 of them will be on F1 topics, and the other 2 will be on E1 topics. So 50% of the exam is P1, and this slightly relates to the question that Baron has asked. I'll get to that in a second. So 50% of the exam is P1. So one of the first things you need to do is go to the P1 syllabus and go through that and identify areas that you need a bit of revision on, because for some of you it's probably a while since you did your P1 exam. It might be some months ago, it might have been the last one you took, but whatever it is, you're probably going to have to do some revision. So you go back to the syllabus, maybe get a highlighter and highlight the areas in green that you don't need to worry about. You studied those recently, I'm not worried about those coming up. But maybe in orange or in red highlighter, you go through topics and you think, oh, I didn't like that one very much, I can't really remember it, I need to study that one. So the thing is, pretty much anything from the syllabus can come up. Now we can guide you and help you and suggest what we think the most likely topics are going to be, but that's by no means a kind of a rule. That's just what we think is most likely to come up. That doesn't mean something else from some other part of the syllabus will come up. So you go through P1 first, I would say, and study the topics that you're not sure about. Do the same with F1 and do that with E1. And then once you're comfortable with topics and the syllabus content, then you want to go on and start applying that by doing exams. So if you can get some mock exams, at Astranti, we do a series of mock exams that are based on the most likely issues, and you can get feedback and marking for those, which is really, really useful. In fact, by far and away, when we get students who take our OCS course and they pass, they say usually the most valuable thing to them was doing the mock exams or getting the feedback from markers. So that's really that's kind of the third phase. So first phase, know the pre-scene. Second phase, study, do your study, get to know the syllabus. Third phase is practice the exam. So under exam conditions, do some mock exams, get some marking and feedback, really valuable. Otherwise, you can go on to the CIMA Connect and find past papers and maybe make yourself sit past papers under exam conditions, just to test yourself and get used to having to work under those conditions, writing to time, and maybe you need to, in doing that, in sitting the exam under time conditions, you realize that you tend to go off on a tangent sometimes, or you don't have a logical, clear structure, and that will help you to identify your weaknesses in your exam strategy. So that would be a kind of overall approach I would suggest for those of you wondering how to do that. So I will get onto this question. So Baron asks, what P1 and F1 topics would you like us to focus on? Well, I suppose there's 2 answers to that. The first is that you need to know all of them, really, because any of them could come up. But I can certainly talk about the ones that will certainly always come up again and again, and the most important ones. So starting with P1, you're always going to get questions on variance analysis. Whatever, variance is obviously a broad topic, but in pretty much every variant of the exam, I see variance analysis questions. So that needs to be an area that you are comfortable with and have studied well and can do operational style questions on. So that means interpreting and understanding why variances have occurred and what that means. They always come up. Other ones that come up in P1 a lot, there's lots of you always get questions on costing and budgeting. And one that I think would be probably quite likely for this exam is a switch over, or potentially a switch from standard absorption costing. Maybe the company consider implementing activity-based costing, and so you might get a question where you're identifying cost drivers, or you're talking about that initial setting up of activity-based costing. Maybe it's more a discussion of what the advantages to the company would be of activity-based costing and the disadvantages, and maybe you'd sort of say, well, given that there would be a lot of costs and disadvantages to it, maybe we shouldn't do it. Those are the kind of questions that you get relating to P1. You also get risk questions as well. So something that comes up a lot, things like shadow price, linear regression, payoff tables, decision trees, break even, those kind of basic fundamental sort of management accounting tools. You need to be, fairly familiar and confident with those. That's P1 for F1. I would say the main focus really needs to be the various accounting standards. So you won't really get questions on the regulatory environment. That's not to say they never happen. They do sometimes, but they're less frequent. You're usually going to get a question on how to interpret and sort of implement a particular standard. So perhaps a company is selling off old non-current assets and you have to use IFRS 5 to talk through how would you discontinue an operation or have a non-current asset held for sale. You might get events occurring after the reporting period. You might get an inventory obsolescence leading to the write-down of inventory, and you're implying IAS 2. So what you want to do really is go through F1 and make a list of all the kind of standards that come up, just relating to basic sort of accounting stuff, and just make sure you're comfortable with those on the sort of recognition criteria and the initial and subsequent measurements and the disclosures and things like that. When it comes to group accounts, which is obviously a big part of F1, you don't tend to get questions that are very sort of detailed and focused on doing the business combinations and doing the group accounts. If you get a question on acquisitions, it will be slightly more about how you would establish control and what that means for the company, and how shareholding leads to control and what control means, and whether if you become a parent, you have to produce accounts, and what impact on our financial statements would this acquisition have. So it tends to be more applied in a higher level. You're not doing the actual aggregation of lines of the statements and all that kind of thing. So certainly know the difference between associates and business combinations and how those two things are treated differently. Other F1 topics, working capital management is always going to come up. So for this company in particular, you've got very high inventory levels. You've got potential issues with credit control. If you look at their receivables days, they're a little bit higher than you would expect. And we know that two of the company's main customers, main customer groups, it would be the department stores and the other bigger group, the nationwide department stores and apparel stores. They have quite a lot of power because of their size, and they negotiate quite significantly longer terms of credit, around about 45 days, compared to the average of 30 days for the smaller customers. And even at that 45 days, I think the average receivables day is closer to 50 or something like that. So these customers are obviously taking longer to pay back. We may have some credit control issues, so you could get a question on the credit control process and what needs to be done to try and bring that in line. Inventory management, obviously there is a lot of inventory and there's such quick rotation of inventory, so many new designs coming in. They're only really maybe popular for a few months. You could run the risk of inventory obsolescence. Cash balance seems to be okay. I'm not too concerned about cash. And tax is the other thing in F1. So tax issues would be, I don't know, government subsidy for the use of renewable energy, or perhaps you've invested in a new kiln that's entirely powered by solar energy, and you get some kind of government grant for that, and it would be counting for that government grant, or maybe it would be talk about the impact of the tax cut, or whether it's an exemption or whatever. Those are probably the main P1 and F1 topics. I hope that answers your question. We have another question. How is your main focus on the certificate level of business accounting? So this is, perhaps you're in the wrong Q&A. I don't know what you're referring to there. This is for the operational case study. Certificate level is BA1, BA2, BA3, BA4. That's a different thing. There isn't a case study for that. Okay, so guys, do ask questions if you've got them. Ask anything you like. Specific things about AKL Sparkle, I'll talk a bit more about them if you like. So financially, from a financial perspective, I already talked a little bit about their receivables days, but their inventory days are very high. It takes them a long time to turn raw materials into finished goods. And that's pushing up their working capital cycle, which is potentially getting a bit out of hand. It got higher in the past, it increased over the past 12 months, and the company are probably holding a bit too much stock. So they may need to revalue or evaluate their current inventory control systems. Maybe that could be an exam question that comes up. Payables days are lower than their credit periods. So AKL Sparkle, they have 30 days of credit with their suppliers, but they on average are paying back sooner. So we need to wonder why they're paying back sooner. Now that will obviously build good relationships with their suppliers, but also at the same time, it means you're not utilizing that credit period that's been given to you. So the company could afford to potentially have slightly longer credit periods. And if they do have good relationships with the suppliers, maybe they could push for longer than 30 days for payables. What else about the company? I suppose we could talk about some of their strengths and weaknesses. So let me just get up my notes. So there's quite a few strengths for the company. So they are the top competitor in the affordable fashion sector. So they're obviously in a kind of decent position in the overall market. Even though there's bigger competitors out there within their particular segment in affordable fashion, they are the top company. They've got a very distinct brand. They're kind of well known for these bracelets that they actually do. They've experienced rapid growth in the last 15 years. They went from a sort of 4 or 5 person operation to having, not far off of 1,000 staff. They've got a decent cash balance. Their cash balance was increased over the years, so they've got plenty of cash to maybe fund new projects and things like that. And they've got quite a lot of staff expertise. So the directors, the owners, I forget their names, but the founders and the CEO and creative director, they have a lot of experience of how they've built the company up, so they understand everything about it and how it all works. So quite a lot of strengths. Weaknesses: they haven't got any physical stores and they don't have an online store. That for me is their biggest kind of issue we have here, and that's most likely going to be a scenario for an exam. So the potential, well, the option or the possibility of AKL Sparkle opening up a physical store in a city or in a couple of towns, or maybe investing in and developing out their own website where they directly sell to end consumers. And that's going to have a big impact on how the company operates, and you could get lots of different questions out of there: how it would be funded, the implications of IT, maybe there should be some ethical questions there around big data. You'd have questions around staff and what that would mean for staff. So loads of things. So I think that's probably going to be a scenario in one of the exams. They're quite limited product range. That's another issue too. So they do one thing really well, but they only do one thing. So they kind of got all their eggs in one basket at the moment. These silver beaded bracelets. So that's just one kind of bracelet. Well, silver and leather straps. And lots of different types of bead. There's a lot of variety within this one product that they do, but it's just one product, and they're very reliant on it. Silver, the popularity of silver at the moment. There isn't really much of a marketing strategy at the company. It's not really mentioned in the pre-scene. If there is one, then perhaps that's referred to in the exam. But if going on what's in the pre-scene, they really don't have, well, there's not much about it. So we just don't know, and it's potentially a weakness if they don't have much of a marketing strategy. The enameling department seems to be quite problematic. So we've got enameling. There's some staff issues there. We have our apprenticeship scheme. It was an attempt to reduce turnover, but because skilled enamelers are so sought after in the market, because in Newland, manufacturing jewelry is such a big thing that enamelers are really in demand, and they can afford to go to the best places for the best wages and the best salaries. So it's really hard to keep your enamelers, and they've got the apprenticeship scheme to try and reduce turnover. They've got issues with quality sometimes, enamel not being applied in the right way, causing defects further on down the line. We potentially have some issues with the quality of our enamel supply as well. So the actual quality of the enamel powder that we buy in isn't the best, and that could potentially be causing issues. So enameling is maybe the most problematic part of the production process. I've already mentioned credit control. There's some issues with that. High inventories too, seems to be very high. Another thing I think is a weakness, I think the company have a lack of strategic focus. What you've got are this husband and wife team who have built up a company over the last 15 years, but they still seem to be very involved and very interested in the kind of day-to-day activities, what the company is doing. You've got the creative director, Kim, who is very much involved still in the design process and coming up with designs. Now, that's obviously what she's done over the past, but as creative director, you may question whether or not that's something that should be delegated. And maybe there's a general sense of there's a lack of strategic focus in the company. Sorry, let's just get back up the chat just to see if there's any more questions. Okay, there are a few more questions, so I'll try and get through these. For this case study, would you advise to ignore marginal costing? Well, the company uses standard absorption costing. They don't use marginal costing. And if they were going to do anything, they would probably they'd do something differently in absorption. So maybe they change their overhead absorption rate or something like that. Or they would be looking at going over to activity-based costing or some other aspects. It's probably unlikely that they'd switch to a marginal costing at this stage, particularly for a manufacturing company. So you could probably ignore. I don't want to say you should ignore it because you never know what the examiner is going to do. I could say ignore it, and then the examiner deliberately finds a way to examine it, which would be a bit annoying. So I wouldn't prioritize it. Let's put it like that. Don't prioritize studying marginal costing, but maybe have enough of a memory of how it works that if you get examined on it, you know what to say. Do you think that this case study is similar to King Crystal's case study? Yes, it is. King Crystal was a case study from, was it February or August 2018? A lot of similarities in the way they are, they're taking their raw materials, they're a manufacturing company, they are marketing themselves in a similar sort of way. They kind of have this, niche position. A lot of similarities there. So yeah, if you were going to go back and, there's not much benefit to going back and looking at old pre-scenes, but you can maybe flick through some of the old exam questions from that particular sitting. That might be a useful thing to do to give you an idea of the kind of things that are examined. Of course, there's no guarantee that the exam for King Crystal will be anything like current exam. I'd recommend just looking through as many past papers as you can, just to get an idea of the kind of questions that you're going to get, and to get very familiar with the exam itself. Okay, so still got about 10 minutes or so left. So guys, if you do have questions, do ask those, and I'll get through as many as I can. Thanks for those of you who are asking the questions. Oh, before I go on as well, we currently have an offer on the OCS course. So the operational case study course, go to astranti.com and navigate to the operational course part of the website. We have a course on offer. That offer is ending today at midnight. So you've only got, what is it, 11 hours, 10 and a half hours to make the most of this. And that is £150 off the price of the full course. So effectively, rather than £700, it's £550. So that ends tonight. If you're interested in getting an operational case study course for this particular sitting, make the most of that. The code is OCS August, all in capitals, OCS August 19. The code is on the website. If you go to the course page on the website, you'll find the code there. So take advantage of that while it's available. Of course, if you're watching this after today's date, with the 1st of July, which is when we're having this live broadcast now, if you're watching this in the future, that offer is no longer available. Okay, so talked about strengths, talked about weaknesses. Let's go and talk a bit about opportunities and threats for this particular company. So the most obvious opportunity would be a new products line. So expanding their range, doing different kinds of bracelets, different kinds of jewelry, maybe earrings and rings and necklaces, and maybe things completely different as well that are still made of silver, so cutlery or ornaments or something like that. An acquisition is possible, whether that would be AKL Sparkle buying a smaller competitor that maybe specializes in a certain kind of product, perhaps glass beads or something like that, or whether it might be a bigger company looking to buy Sparkle. Overseas expansion seems probable. They've got, Newland are known, it's a country known around the world for its jewelry, so they obviously have the ability to go overseas and use that, use that in their brand in competing in overseas markets. An online shop would be an obvious thing to do as well. So just setting up a website and having a store section of the website, and then you'd have that direct sales channel with your end consumers. Another possible opportunity would be to invest in corporate social responsibility, because this is something the company seems to take quite seriously. They're a very good employer. They pay above minimum wage. They have very high staff welfare. So they obviously have a lot of, they really care about corporate social responsibility. They try to source ethically sourced silver, and potentially looking into recycled silver, to use recycled silver in the production process. So some investment in that area might be an opportunity for them, and that increases the brand and gives them a competitive advantage, of course. Okay. Talk about some threats. Threats the company face. Large competitors are going to be a big issue. There are two huge competitors who operate or who are based in Newland, and they are internationally massive companies too, who are jewelry manufacturers. So they're going to be powerful competitors. Could be a change in regulation, something like that. So and a change in regulation may be to do with employment regulation or legislation. That means that AKL Sparkle, even though they are very good with their staff, if the regulation means that it pushes minimum wage up or has minimum contracts or whatever it is, AKL Sparkle will have to respond to that. Product recall could happen if there's some issue or defect in a batch of products and that goes out to consumers. They'll have to recall that, and that will have an impact on the company. They could have issues with their suppliers. Now there's several different suppliers. You've got these suppliers of silver, supplier of enamel, supplier of other bits like the wax and the plaster and other things like that. There's another one. I can't remember what it is now. There is another supplier, but they've got various relationships with their suppliers. They have, there could be an ethical issue. There's that bit in the pre-scene where there's that article towards the end talking about the impact of silver mining and how the popularity of silver has meant that more and more silver mining is happening, but that's having a really bad impact, not only on the environment, but also on communities and has a social impact too. So if their supplier is a silver miner, there are some ethical issues around that could impact AKL Sparkle too. Talked about inventory obsolescence, so possibly some stock will go out of style or that it need to be gotten rid of or something like that, and that could relate to a product recall question too. There also could be some staff issues or HR issues. You're dealing with a production line with people are exposed to certain dangers. Particularly you're working with molten silver, and you've got furnaces and kilns and chemicals in the production process, and there are people involved at various stages of the production process, so they are exposed to danger, making sure that they are safe and they have appropriate training. You could have issues around increasing automation, making people, having to make people redundant, or people, their jobs, the scope of their job gets narrower and narrower as more automation is brought into the company. That's an issue that needs to be dealt with from an HR perspective too. Okay, so we've got about a minute left. Not too many questions on this one today. That's fine. Do get in touch with us if you come across this video after the Q&A. Perhaps we'll have another one if there's enough demand for it. We're happy to keep asking questions, but if you head to our website, you'll find comment sections and discuss comment sections on all our different pages. So if you're interested or if you're worried, have any questions about this particular case, then just have a look on our website and leave a comment, and we'll get back to you. We're also on social media, so you find us on Facebook. We have an operational students Facebook group. You can join that and have a talk about the case study. We're on Twitter. We're on YouTube. Lots of videos will be released on YouTube. And like I said, if there's enough demand for it, we'll do another Q&A and get some questions from you there. So one final question just came in there from Baron again. So ethics is very important as a question. Ethics is very important. It will come up in some form in the exam. It might be an entire sort of question, 15-mark question, well, 12 or 13-mark question that you get on ethics, talking through an ethical issue and what it means and how to deal with it. It might just be that you have a kind of smaller requirement to talk about the ethical issue within a bigger problem. But yeah, certainly ethics, you will want to go back and learn the CIMA ethical principles and make sure you know how to apply those in ethical scenarios. Okay, so I think we'll leave it there for now then. Thanks to those of you who watched. I hope that was useful for you. Answered all the questions, talked a bit about the company. I'll just remind you again that there is an offer that ends at midnight tonight for the operational case study course. It's £150 off the price of the course, so make the most of that if you're interested. Otherwise, good luck in your studies. Hope the revision goes well. Get in touch with us if you have any questions at all. We'll try and help you out in any way we can. And good luck in your exam in August. Okay, thanks guys.